Before we begin, I want to remind you, if today's topic touches a raw nerve, you are allowed to stop. This episode, it addresses shame, especially the kind that hides inside survivors of manipulation and abuse and emotional grooming. So, it can bring up memories and emotions and doubts that you might have buried for a long season. So if your body is asking you to pause, please honor that. Healing isn't a sprint. Your safety matters far more than the completion of this episode. Now, if you're ready, let's begin. Shame doesn't enter loudly often. It slips in through the cracks. It borrows the voice of your abuser, and then it whispers it back to you in your own tone. It twists memories until you're not even sure what was done to you in the first place, and what you somehow believe you allowed. See, shame doesn't say you were harmed. It's more likely to say you let this happen. You didn't fight back hard enough. You liked the attention. You knew better. You said yes. You could have left. And then just like that, what was once clearly a violation now becomes a question mark, a fog, a weight that you carry in silence because you can't quite name it without also accusing yourself as well. This is how grooming systems like the 764 keep people bound for so long, not just with manipulation, but with shame that follows that manipulation. Because if they can't control you forever, the least they can do is they can convince you to control yourself. And they'll convince you through silence and through self-blame, through a constant gnawing question. What does this say about me? You see, manipulation is temporary, but shame outlasts it by a far margin. Shame lives in your body. It lives in your posture. Your voice carries it. Your hesitations, your inability to trust, your compulsive over-explaining, your refusal to need anything, your instinct to disappear, especially when things get intimate. Shame is a storyteller. And the story it tells is quite simple. It says, you are what happened to you. Not that it hurt, not that it was wrong, not that even someone failed you, but that you are the failure. That you should have been stronger. You should have been quieter. You should have been more assertive. You should have been less trusting. You should have been more informed. And I mean, if they can convince you of that, they don't need to keep hurting you. I mean, you'll do it for them. You'll stay quiet. You'll isolate. You'll hide. You'll beat yourself up for not speaking sooner. You'll avoid spaces where your story might be validated because validation feels really foreign right now. And all this while, you'll carry that shame like it's yours to wear and to bear. What if I told you it never was, though? What if the shame that you're carrying is really the echo of someone else's actions and not a reflection of your character? What if the only thing that you're guilty of is needing to be seen or wanting to be loved or trusting someone who twisted your longing into leverage? See, that's not shameworthy. That's human. And your humanity should never be used as evidence against you. But shame, it doesn't really care about nuance like that. Shame is not logical. Shame is like primal. It speaks to the part of you that fears disconnection more than death. Because for many of us, the deepest fear isn't the pain of what happened. The deepest fear is more that if people knew, they would walk, they would leave. They'd look at you differently. They'd treat you like you were broken, or worse, like you were complicit. And so you keep the story inside, and you wrap it in silence, and you minimize it, and you edit it until even you don't recognize it anymore. And maybe that worked for a while, until it didn't. Until the shame started leaking into your relationships, and your confidence, and your parenting, and your voice, your boundaries. Until you realized you weren't just keeping the story quiet, you were keeping yourself quiet. And maybe now, finally, you're starting to wonder, what would happen if I told the truth? What would happen if I peeled the shame off the memory and then named it for what it actually was? I mean, what would happen if I stopped protecting the reputation of a person or a group or a system that never really protected me? See, what would happen if I finally said it out loud? If I said, I was targeted, or I was used, I was manipulated, I was left to carry the blame for something I didn't create. That sentence is heavy, but it's also sacred, because it shifts the weight. It moves the shame from your shoulders to the light, where it can't really grow anymore. Because shame feeds on silence. Shame feeds on silence, but it dies in the presence of empathy. And here's the truth that shame never wants you to hear. And that is, you are not what happened to you, right? You are not the role that you were groomed into. You are not the silence that you adopted to stay safe. You are not the decisions that you made when you didn't have all the information. See, you are not the part of you that froze instead of fighting. You're not the reaction that someone used evidence against your pain. You are far more than that. And the fact that you're still here, still breathing, still questioning, still reaching, still yearning, is proof that shame does not get the final word. But don't get me wrong, letting go of shame isn't really about being loud. It's about being honest. It's about saying, I've blamed myself for far too long. I've worn this as a label when it was actually a wound. I've in essence internalized someone else's brokenness as my identity. And once you name that, you start to remember who you were before the shame kicked in. You start, in essence, to access your own voice again, and your boundaries, and your ability to say, that was not my fault. Your ability to feel safe without over-explaining is part of this as well. Your ability to take up space without apologizing. See, you start to live from truth instead of from trauma. And slowly, the weight begins to lift. Not because the story disappears, but because you're not carrying it alone anymore. You bring it into the light, and you speak it into safe places, and you stop choosing silence over wholeness. And most importantly, you stop calling it shame when it was always just grief. Grief that no one protected you. Grief that your openness was used against you. Grief that you thought it was love. Grief, in essence, that you didn't know how to leave. A grief that still lingers. So let yourself grieve. Because once you do, the shame loses its grip. It has no hooks anymore that are left. and it only has space for you to return to yourself. See, you're not too far gone. You're not too damaged. You're not the sum of your mistakes or your silence. I'll be 2 seconds. You are someone who has survived a story that should never have happened. And now you're choosing to tell it differently. So we do this not to stay stuck, but more so to start healing again. So if this episode has helped you name something that shame has been part of your process that you've been carrying, join me tomorrow, because in that next episode, which I've titled When Boys Become Targets, we're going to be exploring how grooming systems like the 764 don't just weaponize vulnerability in generality, but how they specifically target young boys, young men, and the emotionally neglected in our communities. They're the ones who are trying to be strong, but are quietly starving for connection. And we'll talk a little bit more about how to protect them, how to reach them, and how to see them before someone else preys on their pain. Until then, keep listening. Keep listening to your body. Keep challenging the lie. Keep walking towards people who remind you that you are not your shame. You were never your shame. Thanks for listening to this episode. I'll see you tomorrow.